What's up guys, Red Wing here, and welcome to another video. Today's story is yet another request from a subscriber on the channel. I actually found it to be very interesting. So as promised last Saturday, today's video will be, what if Ahsoka turned to the dark side and became Sidious's apprentice instead of Anakin? For this story, we're going to assume that Palpatine actually found Ahsoka after she was brought into the Jedi Order by Plo Koon, and was able to manipulate her ever since. Without any further ado, let's begin with today's story. Our story begins on Coruscant after Palpatine had finished training Darth Maul for the day. When Maul leaves to return to his quarters, Palpatine, who is currently the Senator of Naboo, senses a very powerful presence in the Force, and felt that it was coming from the Jedi Temple. He would decide to infiltrate the temple late at night, disguised as a Jedi, while Maul was asleep, the curiosity piquing his interest like a moth is drawn to a light bulb. When he reaches the temple, he would track the presence he sensed via use of the Force, and it would draw him into a room where the babies that the Jedi had found slept, and in one of the cribs was the infant Ahsoka Tano. Palpatine then thought to himself, he was already training Maul as his true apprentice, and he was currently in the process of manipulating Dooku to his side. Palpatine would then think to himself, if he could do to this child the exact same thing he was doing to Dooku, and do so from birth similarly to what he was doing with Maul, then she could very well become a very powerful apprentice. So, Palpatine would leave the temple, and from here, many things would change. From here, the timeline would go very similarly to how it does in the original timeline. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan engage Maul on Naboo. Obi-Wan cuts Maul in half. Dooku still kills Yaddle and becomes Darth Tyrannus, and Obi-Wan takes the young Anakin Skywalker as his Padawan. From here, things take a turn. For starters, Palpatine would acknowledge Anakin's power, and he would develop a sort of respect for it, but he would plan to have Anakin killed during the Clone Wars so as to prevent the Chosen One prophecy. And Ahsoka would be the one to be manipulated by Palpatine and not Anakin. Anakin, on the other hand, would do better than he would in the original timeline, but he would still be plagued by his attachments to both his mother and to Padme. So, Obi-Wan, after 3 years of coming to understand his young apprentice, and after Qui-Gon's Force Ghost would suddenly speak inside of Obi-Wan's head, would secretly venture to Tatooine with the purpose of freeing Anakin's mother. Obi-Wan is successful, and when he returns to Coruscant, he hears Qui-Gon's voice again, and he realizes that this was what the Jedi were supposed to be. They weren't supposed to serve the Senate alone. They weren't supposed to follow the will of the Republic. They weren't supposed to be loyal to anyone. The Jedi were supposed to help the people, all the people of the galaxy, and to serve the will of the Force. It is then that Obi-Wan realizes that attachments may not be as bad as the Jedi Council deemed them to be, and so, when he returns to the temple, he grabs Anakin, who had just woken up, and they travel to Tatooine, where Anakin has an emotional reunion with his mother. After this point, Obi-Wan would make a continued effort to allow Anakin to have visits with his mother, who would still go on to marry Cliegg Lars just as she had in the original timeline. Obi-Wan would also show Anakin the Coruscant underworld, and he would also go with Anakin to meetings with senators and with Palpatine, who is now the Chancellor of the Republic. During one of these meetings, Anakin reunites with Padme, and Obi-Wan would allow Anakin to explore the attachment he has with her as well. Obi-Wan would become more and more like Qui-Gon in this timeline as he continued to allow Anakin to explore his attachments, and, in an attempt to follow his own teachings, he would make an effort to visit Duchess Satine on Mandalore, whilst Anakin was visiting his family. When Satine asks him about the reasoning behind his visit, Obi-Wan says that while he still wishes to remain a Jedi, he wants to try another way to use the Force for good. That after teaching Anakin, he wanted to influence the Jedi into figuring out that there could be another way, and that rekindling the relationship he had with Satine was only the beginning of him going down that path. Satine would accept Obi-Wan's reasoning and the relationship would be rekindled before Obi-Wan returned to Coruscant. Meanwhile, Palpatine would make continued efforts to oversee Ahsoka's training, and he would eventually befriend the young Togruta when she was only 4 years old. Palpatine would feed her mind with doubts about the Jedi's capability to do good, and Ahsoka, seeing Palpatine as a father figure, would believe him. Dooku would still organize the separatist movement in the shadows, while Maul would still survive being cut in half. For Palpatine, everything was going according to his plan. By the time we reach Attack of the Clones, Anakin had been introduced to Satine by Obi-Wan, and Anakin and Padme would occasionally go on secret double dates with Obi-Wan and Satine. However, the assassination attempt on Padme is when things take a turn. This time, Obi-Wan is the one to protect Padme on Naboo, while Anakin is the one to discover the clone army, before figuring out that Jango Fett was the assassin they were looking for. Anakin would be the one to fight Jango instead of Obi-Wan, and Jango would have a harder time escaping, but he eventually does so when Anakin has a vision about his mother's death at the hands of the Tuscans. Anakin would place a tracker on Jango's ship just in time before immediately contacting Obi-Wan, and he and Padme would agree to meet Anakin on his home planet. This time, since Anakin would have gotten to his mother slightly earlier, he would be able to save his mother, and he would not slay the Tuscans. When Shmi was brought home, she would thank the Jedi profusely before hugging Anakin goodbye and telling him to complete his mission. Anakin bids his mother farewell, and he, Padme, and Obi-Wan track Jango to Geonosis. Since Anakin and Padme travel with Obi-Wan to Geonosis, instead of Anakin attempting to rescue Obi-Wan whilst bringing Padme, all three of them get captured and taken to the Geonosian arena. Everything goes similarly to how it does in the original timeline up until Padme falls out of the transport. Anakin, since Obi-Wan would have taught Anakin practically the same way Qui-Gon would be much more level-headed and calm, and Anakin and Obi-Wan would not have their argument that they had about personal feelings. Thus, Anakin and Obi-Wan would duel Dooku together. They hold their own for a long while, and then Yoda shows up, turning the tide of the battle in favor of the Jedi. The duel comes to an end when Yoda is able to cut off one of Dooku's legs, and Dooku is captured by the clones on behalf of the Republic. The Clone Wars would break out as they had in the original timeline. Anakin would still marry Padme in secret, and Ahsoka would still be assigned to Anakin as his Padawan. With Palpatine still being able to manipulate Ahsoka, and Anakin still not exactly being ready for a Padawan, the Clone Wars go almost the exact same way as they originally had in the original timeline, with Dooku ultimately being rescued by General Grievous a short while later before he made it to Coruscant. Maul would return to the galaxy the same way he had in the original timeline, and he would end up ultimately threatening Satine on Mandalore. However, this time, Obi-Wan, with Anakin's help, is able to ultimately save her, before the three of them then escape the planet. Just after this happens, though, Darth Sidious arrives on Mandalore, and he ultimately kills Savage just as he had in the original timeline. After being held in captivity for about 3 weeks by Sidious, Maul is able to escape. In the third year of the Clone Wars, Dooku would be captured again, this time by Anakin and Ahsoka on Cato Nemoidia, where Palpatine had sent him. Little did Dooku know that this was a trap to lure him back into the custody of the Jedi, though Dooku would realize this far too late. When Dooku was captured, and after Ahsoka saved Anakin's life again, they received news of the Jedi Temple bombing. The story arc goes the same way as it does in the original timeline, and Ahsoka is framed for the crime. Now this point in the story is where things take the biggest turn. After the Council expels Ahsoka from the Jedi Order, Palpatine personally pays Ahsoka a visit, and, feeling that the time was now, he reveals to Ahsoka that he was Darth Sidious, and he gives her one of his lightsabers before taking her to Dooku's cell. Flashing back, before Anakin and Ahsoka left for Cato Nemoidia, Palpatine would accelerate his manipulation of Ahsoka, and he even told her the tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise, manipulating her into believing that Plagueis had done no evil. So, after Ahsoka was framed for the crime, she would be given the chance to prove her innocence and take her revenge on the Jedi, after dueling with Dooku to the death. Ahsoka, anger consuming her very being for what the Jedi and Republic had done to her, attacks Dooku. Dooku, who didn't have a weapon, dodged her blows repeatedly. However, he was at a severe disadvantage due to his circumstances, and he is quickly overwhelmed by Ahsoka, who is using the dark side of the Force in this moment. The duel is ferocious, and Dooku uses the Force on more than one occasion, but Ahsoka manages to eventually disarm Dooku. Palpatine orders for Ahsoka to kill Dooku, and, in her anger, she obeys, with Dooku's last words attempting to inform Ahsoka of Palpatine's manipulation. Palpatine then tells her that she's fulfilling her destiny, as Ahsoka then kneels before her new master, who in turn gives her the Sith name Darth Venjari. After this happens, things go the same way as they do in the original timeline, with Ahsoka being acquitted of all charges with Anakin's help, but this time, she decides to stay in the Jedi Order, but not as a loyal Jedi, rather as a mole within the Jedi's ranks. Following this, Palpatine begins executing the final phase of his plan, destroying the Jedi and turning the Republic into the Empire. Knowing the Jedi trust Ahsoka again after her reinstatement post-Cato Nemoidia, Palpatine manipulates the war to place her in a position of complete advantage. He orders General Grievous to attack Coruscant and orchestrates his own quote-unquote kidnapping, knowing that it will split the Jedi's focus. Meanwhile, Maul, still roaming the galaxy following the death of Savage Opress, returns to Mandalore. Scarred and furious, he rallies the remnants of Death Watch and his Shadow Collective. Maul is determined to destroy Sidious's plans and, after having a vision, warns anyone who will listen of a coming darkness tied to Ahsoka. Bo-Katan, desperate to end Mandalorian suffering, sends word to the Jedi Council asking for their help in capturing Maul. It is then that Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan receive word of Palpatine's kidnapping. Due to Ahsoka's recent quote-unquote redemption, the Council sends her and Obi-Wan to rescue the Chancellor from Grievous's flagship. Ahsoka, secretly orchestrating this with Sidious, ensures everything proceeds as intended. Meanwhile, Anakin is dispatched to Mandalore alongside Rex and one half of the 501st Legion to capture Maul. Upon arriving, Anakin confronts Maul in the Mandalorian throne room. Maul, wild-eyed and seething with knowledge, speaks plainly, telling Anakin that Ahsoka had been corrupted and that he needed to confront her before it was too late. Anakin, conflicted and disturbed, engages Maul in an intense duel through the palace and underground vaults. Maul doesn't seek power anymore. He seeks vengeance on his former master and hopes to destroy his plan through Anakin. Despite Maul's strength and cunning, Anakin ultimately defeats Maul and captures him. As Maul is restrained, he screams out, horror in his voice, that it was too late, and that Sidious had already won. It is then that Anakin senses the tremor in the Force, and he knows that something dark is happening on Coruscant. On the Invisible Hand, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka fight their way to the Chancellor. Ahsoka performs flawlessly, too flawlessly, and Obi-Wan begins to suspect that something deeper is wrong. After the rescue, Grievous flees to Utapau. Obi-Wan is then sent to eliminate Grievous, leaving Ahsoka behind with Palpatine, as both him and Ahsoka had sensed Obi-Wan's suspicions. Then, that night, Palpatine quote-unquote reveals himself to Ahsoka, who in turn informed the Jedi Council that Palpatine was Darth Sidious. Windu tells Ahsoka to stay at the Jedi Temple, but this time, Ahsoka sneaks off to the Chancellor's office while no one else is looking, and Ahsoka is with Palpatine when Mace Windu arrives to arrest him. The duel between Windu and Sidious plays out similarly, except Ahsoka would suddenly activate her new red blades, killing Kit Fisto from behind as Sidious swiftly kills Aegon Kolar and Saesee Tiin. Windu holds off both Ahsoka and Sidious at once, but he is eventually overwhelmed and killed by the might of both Sith. Then, with Darth Venjari by his side, Sidious issues Order 66. In this timeline, Ahsoka is the one who marches on the Jedi Temple, leading her half of the 501st with blood-red sabers drawn but not yet ignited. Her former friends are completely caught off guard as Ahsoka's blood ran cold with the anger that flowed through them. Her knowledge of the temple's layout and Jedi tactics allows her to cut through defenders with terrifying precision as she slaughtered younglings and masters alike. After receiving a transmission from Obi-Wan about Order 66, Anakin races back to Coruscant to meet him and Yoda, sensing what has happened. When he lands on Coruscant, he sees the Jedi Temple in flames. Before Anakin gets to the temple, though, the security footage that Obi-Wan and Yoda see shows Ahsoka as she continued her slaughter of the Jedi. Obi-Wan and Yoda, sensing that Anakin had entered the temple, knew that they needed to find him and fast. Entering, Anakin finds bodies of friends and students. Then, in the central rotunda, he sees Ahsoka, cloaked in black, red lightsabers drawn, and surrounded by destruction. Their confrontation is heart-wrenching. Anakin simply asked Ahsoka why she would do something like this. They trusted her, Anakin said. He trusted her. Ahsoka expresses her anger towards the Jedi, telling Anakin that she had simply seen the truth, and that Palpatine showed her what the Jedi were, what they truly were. Anakin, realizing that it was exactly like Maul had said, lunges for his former Padawan, and the duel begins, agile and furious, and filled with emotion and betrayal. Ahsoka is powerful, but Anakin is fighting for everything he believes in. The battle is evenly matched until Anakin disarms her and holds his saber over her, promising her that he would not kill her, but that he couldn't save her either. As he hesitates, Palpatine's voice calls through the Force. Ahsoka then vanishes into the shadows using Sith techniques, gravely wounded, but alive nonetheless. Meanwhile, Maul, still imprisoned aboard a Republic cruiser, senses the chaos. He's freed by sympathetic Mandalorian warriors who believe the Jedi have fallen. With nowhere else to go, and knowing Sidious's plans have been set in motion, Maul does the unthinkable. He leads a Mandalorian cell in a last-ditch assault on the newly declared Imperial Palace. The mission fails, and Maul is confronted by both Darth Sidious and Darth Venjari. In one final, desperate attempt to destroy his master, Maul duels both Sith. He mortally wounds several Red Guards, but his arm is ultimately cut off by Darth Venjari, and his last words before he escapes were, "He used me once. Be prepared for the possibility that he will use you too." Anakin, after his duel with Ahsoka, disappears with Obi-Wan, Satine, and Yoda, taking Padme, who at this point was pregnant with twins, into hiding. Darth Venjari would become the public face of the new Empire, second only to Sidious. She's hailed as the Sword of Order, a twisted perversion of her former self. The Jedi are hunted nearly to extinction. The few survivors form a fledgling underground movement led by Anakin and Obi-Wan. Padme would give a healthy birth to Luke and Leia on Alderaan, protected by Anakin and Bail Organa. Yoda would once again exile himself, but keeps communication with Anakin, waiting for the children to come of age. 20 years later, Darth Venjari was now the Empire's enforcer and shadow hand. Where Vader once hunted Jedi in the original timeline, it is now Venjari who leads the Inquisitors. Fierce, unrelenting, and emotionally cold, Venjari becomes the face of fear throughout the galaxy. Clad in black and crimson armor, wielding 2 curved crimson lightsabers, she is whispered about in fear across both Imperial and Rebel channels. Anakin, still devastated by the fall of the Republic and the slaughter of the Jedi, helps shelter younglings and fights in the early rebellion, all while keeping his wife and twin children hidden. Maul, having escaped from Palpatine and Ahsoka, regroups on the fringes of Mandalorian space. He would even manage to gain his revenge on Obi-Wan at one point during the early years of the rebellion, and he ultimately kills Satine in front of him and their son, Jin Kenobi, and the 2 Force wielders would ultimately disappear with Anakin and his family. With Bo-Katan and the Night Owls decimated, Maul recruits disillusioned Mandalorians and rogue Sith cultists into what was now known as the Shadow Collective Reborn, conducting guerrilla warfare against the Empire, particularly targeting Darth Venjari. Maul becomes a dark mirror to both Venjari and the Emperor. Not Sith, not Jedi, but something in between. He believes only he can stop Palpatine's empire from total galactic domination, and he seeks out Luke Skywalker before Sidious or Venjari can find him. Leia Skywalker, choosing a life as a politician like her mother, becomes the chief leader of the rebellion. Luke, meanwhile, trains in secret alongside Jin under Anakin and Obi-Wan's guidance. Luke's training is more accelerated than in the original timeline. Obi-Wan and Anakin know that Venjari will not hesitate to strike. Obi-Wan and Anakin eventually lead Luke and Jin to Dagobah, where Yoda finishes their training. Yoda warns the 2 Padawans, and Luke specifically, that Venjari was not to be underestimated. Venjari, aware of Luke's existence due to intelligence gathered from Imperial spies, and also having an inkling of his presence in the Force, believes him to be the key to fully destroying the Skywalker legacy. On the shattered world of Jeddah, Venjari finally tracks down Anakin, who had been sabotaging Imperial operations in secret. The 2 duel under a broken statue. Anakin, during the duel, pleads with Ahsoka to turn back, but Venjari is unmoved, believing that the Jedi betrayed her and that Anakin is weak for not embracing his darker half. She taunts him, telling him that she's sure his son won't make the same mistake, and implying that she knows about Luke's existence. Their duel is brutal, but ends in a stalemate when Maul intervenes, attempting to kill them both. Venjari is wounded, Maul flees, and Anakin barely survives. After the battle, Anakin decides to return to the rebellion, believing that if he cannot redeem Ahsoka, then he must protect his son from her. The Empire, which had been secretly building a new terror weapon, the Death Star, which was designed to destroy an entire planet, then occupies Endor as a base for the Death Star's operations. Leia leads the attack on Endor's moon alongside Obi-Wan and Jin, while Anakin and Luke would go to Yoda on Dagobah, and at the guidance of Yoda's final vision before he passes away, they surrender themselves to Venjari to confront her and the Emperor aboard the Death Star. Palpatine, now fully reliant on dark force rituals and unnatural life extension, tries to corrupt Luke as the attack on Endor persists. But Luke never attacks in anger. He shows compassion to Ahsoka, calling her his father's sister, telling her that Anakin still believes there's good in her, with Anakin himself reinforcing this as the battle continues. Maul would also enter the duel between Anakin, Luke, and Venjari, attempting to kill them all. But this results in another duel with his master. This time though, Maul does not survive. At the climax of the battle, Venjari hesitates, the conflict evident inside of her like a volcano that was about to erupt. Sidious begins to attempt to kill both Anakin and Luke, but in that moment, haunted by her memories as Ahsoka Tano, by Anakin's voice, by all she's done, she turns on Palpatine, slicing his arm off and slashing him across the chest. But Palpatine blasts her with Sith lightning and calls a lightsaber to quite literally stab her in the back, as he then died from his injuries. Mortally wounded, Venjari collapses. Luke holds her in his arms. She whispers that she had never wanted this life for herself, that all she wanted was to protect people, and that she thought that she could do it better than the Jedi ever could. Luke replies that she still could make a significant difference in the galaxy. With that, Darth Venjari dies not as a Sith apprentice, but as Ahsoka Tano. The Empire would fall after the destruction of the Death Star and the death of Palpatine. Leia would lead the formation of the New Republic on Coruscant alongside her mother Padme. Luke becomes the first of a new kind of Jedi, compassionate, balanced, neither bound by attachment nor consumed by fear. And he begins the process of rebuilding the Jedi Order, an order free of the dogma and corruption of the Sith. Obi-Wan and Jin would choose to join Luke and his Jedi, with Obi-Wan becoming a co-Grand Master alongside Luke, and Jin being granted the rank of Jedi Knight. The galaxy would rebuild after this point, the tale of Darth Venjari remembered by the galaxy as a cautionary tale, but Ahsoka Tano was a name that was remembered as a name that was legend, and the galaxy would never know the truth about her fall from grace. Anakin and Padme would reunite after many years of fighting, and Anakin would develop a better relationship with his daughter Leia, making up for lost time in the process. Padme, in turn, would begin to spend more time with her son, and she would also strive to make up for lost time. Anakin, now reconciled with his past and with the Force, becomes a wandering teacher of lost Jedi lore, refusing to return to the Jedi Order, but preserving its memory as he strived to learn everything he could about the Force. And not only that, he would end up learning from Qui-Gon himself. Anakin would continue his training, not as a Jedi, not as a Sith, and certainly not as whatever Maul claimed himself to be. Instead, he would become a perfect balance to the Force itself, and, in a way, he would still fulfill his destiny as the Chosen One. Well, folks, that's our story today. Let me know what other what-if ideas you have in the comments below. Stay tuned for next week's video, as always. Before we end, I'd just like to point out that 86.9% of those of you who view my videos are not yet subscribed. So do subscribe if you're new. It would really mean a lot to me if you did. Do leave a like on the video if you enjoyed. Turn on those notifications if you're already subscribed so you don't miss a thing. Follow my Instagram at Star Wars Red Wing. Thanks for watching. May the Force be with you, and I'll see y'all later.